two books that I absolutely adored. First one up is Australian writer Jock Serong's Cherrywood. And this was a book that really got under my skin, really surprised me, and took me to that reading spot, where you're going, oh my God, this is lovely, this is lovely. I like being here because I do like to have my reality or a described reality challenged. So it's a two-timeline book. The historical part, which is the 1910, early 20th century Scotland, has one Thomas Renfeather, who is transporting a consignment of cherry timber to Australia. That's the plan. He's a wealthy man, visionary, has a grand scheme, which may or may not be a bit mad, but it all sounds good, very exciting. Going to build a paddle steamer to go across Port Phillip Bay. And, whether or not this is going to happen is essential it's essential that you find it out for yourself. That timeline was just so gorgeously written. I mean, the register was just pitch perfect. It could have come from the pen of Dickens. Gorgeous writing. So Renfeather is going to whoosh over to Australia, leaving behind his wife and daughter temporarily, and they're set to join him. How will all of this pan out? Then we have the current, well, it's not current, it's 1990s. We have Martha, who is a commercial lawyer. And you get the feeling that she's been career motivated, has recently been moved into or promoted into a department where it's all about, getting results, and by hook or by crook is what you feel, and to, be a bit more ruthless than she's probably quite convinced that she's prepared to be. So innate in her, I feel, is already this sort of tendency towards helping people rather than the opposite. On a evening trip between her work and somewhere else, she drops into a pub in the Fitzroy area and is instantly struck by the kind of the proportions, the way it's, the architecture, and by the young man, Joey, behind the bar, who will feature as we go on. As it turns out, our lovely Martha, this pub sticks in her mind. It's not just because of the pash on the guy. There's something odd. There's something that has struck her about it. But when she goes and tries to find it, through whatever means, Google, whatever, she can never get there again. It's not there. So it's like as if it moves. And there is a way that she ends up getting there again. And you work out that this is pure whimsy. It's about as attached to reality as your dreaming is. And it makes everything into a super ride. Now, how are these two stories going to connect? This is what this whole novel is about. Look, it was the most, I loved for Martha that her, there was an awareness of the other, an awareness of that things might not all be as straightforward and as, don't play ball necessarily the way they think they should do, or that we might be open to seeing things that way, that you think the lawyerly brain is going to be, well, boom, 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 boom. But as Serong teaches us, it's all about opening out and listening to what those, where the magic can be found, and what on one level looks like it's straightforward and boxed in, and these are the lines underneath. There are all sorts of seams of story, of narrative, of belief, of history, of space, time, all of that. And the Renfeather narrative, when he eventually comes to Australia and wants to build his paddle steamer project, is an absolute joy. One of those books that hard to work out what if it's got a category, and why should it, but it's sort of part ghost story, because we have people who dip in and out of Martha's visits to the pub and what the pub is being in and of itself and doing. It's part love story. It's part coming of into an awareness of other and the world for Martha. And it's about disappointment, disillusion. It's about contracts and what you bind yourself to. It was the most tremendous ride. Totally loved it. And it's way up there with one of my favorite books of the year. Another book that has that kind of, you don't know what you're letting yourself in for, but on a very blatantly, manifestly wild and woolly and nuts level is Alan Moore's The Great When. Now, this was a book that I picked up and instantly kind of got the feels of sort of Terry Pratchett meets Ben Aranovich, those Rivers of London series, meets, again, a little bit of Dickens in the style of the questing narrative. I mean, it does open with two magicians, good and evil, talking to each other, and that's just kind of like a setting for the what's to play at. Our main protagonist in The Great When is Dennis Knuckleyard, who's not really the brightest spark, but he's not thick either. You kind of see him coming into an awareness of like, so this is what this means, and how he gets himself embroiled in what happens is makes him appear very hapless, but he's one of those survivors. We're in post-World War II, and we're in a London that has been entirely destroyed. Dennis Knuckleyard works for somebody who's not the most pleasant person in the world. She runs a second-hand bookshop. Her name is Coffin Ada, and there's a lot of fun with every single word that Moore puts on the page. You're sitting looking at it and saying, is that coughing or is that coffin? And is it both? So a lot of jokes going on every level. But Coffin Ada runs a second-hand bookshop, and one day she says to young Dennis Knuckleyard, go and pick up some books from said book dealer and then bring them back. And when he brings them back, she says, Dennis, what have you done? And he says, I don't know, what have I done? And there is a book in among the ones that Ada had told him to pick up. There was an extra book. The problem with that extra book is that it doesn't exist, or it shouldn't be here. And Dennis was worried about where here is and what here is. And without being able to tell him too much, Ada says he has to be able to return that book to where it came from. This book belongs to The Other London, and this is what we're looking at. The Other London, also called The Great When, is a place that, of course, Dennis ends up through mishaps, adventure, being pursued. He ends up in and out of the Great When through sort of portals, where it's really not a place any of us would want to hang around for very long. Totally mad, surrealism, Dali meets Bruegel, quite violent, quite sort of horrific sort of dimensions and proportions, and it's not a very friendly place. And Dennis also has to work out exactly who his friends are. But on one level, this is just mad, and it's chaotic, and it's unreal. It's that very straightforward questing line. I've said that, and it's something that is going to continue through more than one book. This is the first in what I think Alan Moore has just said is going to be 5. And he crams a lot into one. It is chaotic. It is, you have to let yourself be carried along by his tide of words. And there are a lot of words, but none of those words are all imbued with sort of symbolism or with significance and meaning, and makes his, makes it that no word is really ever wasted. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of in-jokes. I mean, sort of jokes about the world of magic, the world of art. And there are people who know things who really shouldn't. There are people who wander into the real world, and they shouldn't be there, and how 90% of the world unsees them, which is a very sort of topical notion for us today, what we choose to see and not. Though it's all the time, even though yes, it's fantasy. Fantasy is a vehicle for saying things, and probably the thing that Moore himself says is that, whether magicians are a real thing or not, and in history they've been documented, anybody who writes a book, and you can expand that to all our works, they're the magicians. And I can tell you that that was a magical event, the Great Wen, and I'll be hanging out for the whole quintet. So we better hurry up and write those. That's it. I will see you next time.